In recent days, a lively and heated controversy has erupted in the UK over the decision of a local elementary school to cancel its traditional Easter celebration. This news has caused a wave of outrage and shock among Britons, and for good reason. After all, Britain was essentially founded on Christian values and traditions, and it came as a real blow to many to learn that Easter, as the most important Christian holiday, would not be celebrated at the school. Instead, the school decided not to hold an Easter service, citing the need to respect religious diversity. This decision has raised serious questions. Should respect for different cultures and faiths really mean abandoning the traditions that underpin the country's history? Is this a reflection of the reality of the UK, or is it simply a move to please political correctness? It cannot be overlooked that the UK has always been a proud supporter of its Christian roots. Whether in matters of culture, politics, or education, Christian traditions permeate every aspect of life. Easter, as the central event of the Christian calendar, has always held a special place in the life of the country, from church services to school celebrations. But today, when we hear of attempts to abolish the celebration of Easter in schools, many wonder if we have gotten too caught up in trying to please everyone and have forgotten who we really are. When it comes to a cultural event such as Easter, the historical legacy it represents cannot be ignored. The UK has always been considered a Christian country, and even if modern society has become more secularized, Christian values certainly still play an important role. I just think of the fact that the monarch of the UK is the head of the Church of England, an institution that is directly linked to Christian traditions. This is not just a symbol, it is a real connection to the history and foundations on which the country is built. In this context, abolishing the celebration of Easter at school seems like a step away from the Christian roots and values on which British culture was built. Unfortunately, not all Britons are willing to accept such a change without objection. The situation around the abolition of Easter has caused a powerful outrage among a large part of the population who consider this step not only disrespectful, but also dangerous for the preservation of the country's identity. Society, seeking to show its openness and tolerance, risks forgetting its traditions and roots. And this, in turn, may lead to the loss of part of the national identity. And if we are talking about tolerance, why ignore the traditions and values of the majority while respecting the rights of minorities? The problem is that in the search for compromise and equality, those who profess Christianity, and for whom Easter is part of the national culture, are too often forgotten. Traditions such as Easter are not just religious rituals, they are part of the very fabric of society, binding people together regardless of their personal religious beliefs. Even those who do not consider themselves deeply religious often celebrate the holiday, attending services or spending time with family, enjoying the common tradition that makes a country whole. Easter is not just a religious holiday, it is an important cultural component without which much of what makes up British identity can disappear. In Britain, it is increasingly common to hear the view that the country is no longer Christian, that its traditions have become outdated and should be replaced by something more modern and inclusive. However, despite the multiculturalism of society and increasing secularization, Christian values still remain the foundation on which many laws, traditions, and customs are built. This is reminded not only by cultural events such as Easter, but also by the symbolism that persists in the public space. The abolition of holidays that have deep Christian roots leads to a gradual erasure of historical memory and isolation of the part of society that continues to value and respect these traditions. The current situation in Great Britain is a kind of struggle to preserve cultural and religious identity in a world that is increasingly striving for universalization, while many states seek to accommodate the interests of all groups, often forgetting those whose traditions have shaped the culture of the country for centuries. Is such a change necessary? Is Britain becoming less Christian? And if so, what does this mean for the future of the country and its culture? The abandonment of Easter as a holiday that binds generations of Britons together could have an impact on society's perception of national identity and cultural heritage. In response to the outrage over the abolition of Easter in British schools, there has been a reaction from advocates of a more liberal viewpoint. One of the most prominent expressions of this view has been the declaration that Britain is no longer a Christian country. Against the background of recent events, such as the decision to cancel Easter services in schools, such statements have taken on particular significance. First and foremost, such words touch on the very essence of what it means to be part of a nation that has been built on Christian traditions and values for centuries. However, advocates of more inclusive policies argue that this statement is not only true, but is a necessary step in response to a changing society where religious traditions are being redefined. One of the main arguments of supporters of abolishing Easter comes down to the claim that the UK is no longer an officially Christian country. While this issue is fiercely debated, it must be recognized that the role of Christianity in public life is indeed changing. A country that has in the past prided itself on its Christian roots is now faced with increasing multiculturalism and the emergence of ever new religions and philosophical teachings. In light of this, more and more people are beginning to argue that not only the traditions of the majority but also the interests of minorities should be respected. This is particularly the case with the refusal to hold religious services, such as Easter, in school institutions, citing the desire for inclusiveness. While proponents of this view argue that the UK should adapt to the modern diversity of beliefs and respect the religious sensitivities of all citizens. According to this approach, abandoning Easter is not an attempt to discriminate against Christianity or its traditions, but rather a step towards a fairer and more inclusive society in which everyone has the right to express their faith, but no one should impose their religious practices on others. They point out that modern British schools often teach not only Christian values but also the values of other religions. For example, Islam, Judaism and Buddhism are becoming important parts of the educational program, reflecting a real change in the demographics of the country. Thus, the abolition of Easter and other traditional Christian events is perceived as a step towards harmony and respect for all faiths, rather than an attack on Christian culture. However, opponents of this approach disagree with this view of what is happening. For them, the claim that Britain is no longer a Christian country sounds like a kind of betrayal of historical memory. Christianity, in their view, is still the basis of Britain's moral and cultural foundations, and failure to recognize this reality could lead to the loss of crucial aspects of British identity. Adherents of this position believe that in the quest for inclusivity and political correctness, those whose traditions form the basis of society are often forgotten. In particular, the abolition of Easter is seen as another step in the long process of excluding Christianity from public space. Instead of integrating other cultures and religions within a framework of respect and understanding, the process becomes one-sided, where only minorities are given attention and traditional values are threatened with extinction. This conflict raises an important question: when does inclusiveness and respect for different cultures cross the line beyond which the forgetting of those who have formed the foundation of a nation begins? Traditionalists argue that respect for diversity should not mean abandoning the traditions that have shaped the nation. Easter, like other Christian holidays, was not only a religious rite, but an important cultural element that bound people together, regardless of their deep faith. It was a moment when a nation could unite around shared values despite different beliefs. When the Easter holiday is abolished in schools, it is perceived as not only a step towards secularization, but also an attempt to ignore the historical truth about the values and traditions on which the country was built. It is also important to note that this is not just about the Easter holiday per se. The problem is that the abolition of this holiday is just the tip of the iceberg. With each passing year, more and more people are beginning to believe that in order to create a society in which everyone feels comfortable, it is necessary to increasingly ignore the traditions of the majority. However, it is worth thinking about what kind of country would a country be if it forgot its historical roots and the values on which its society is built. When we talk about multiculturalism and inclusiveness, should we not remember the foundations that originally laid a united nation? The desire to be open and tolerant should not turn into an attempt to destroy what was the basis for the formation of the nation. The crux of this dispute is not just a question of what is celebrated in schools, but what will happen to Britain's national identity in the future. The fact that Easter, as an important element of Christian culture, is being removed from the school curriculum symbolizes a profound change that is taking place in society. This change can be both a blessing and a burden. To preserve the uniqueness of British culture, it is important to find a balance between respect for tradition and openness to new views and ideas. However, this balance must not be lost, otherwise Britain could lose its identity and its role in the world as a country rich in history and tradition. The situation with the abolition of Easter in UK schools has drawn attention not only to the issue of religious holidays, but also to a wider problem: the role of tradition in modern society. If we return to what Easter represents in the cultural context of Britain, it is far more than just a religious event. Easter is part of the cultural background of a country that has been built on Christian values for centuries. For most Britons, the holiday is a link that unites different generations, regardless of their personal faiths. It serves as a reminder that culture and tradition have always been essential elements of the social fabric. And although the world is changing and society is becoming increasingly multicultural, the issue of preserving these traditions in UK educational institutions remains relevant. When discussing the abolition of Easter in schools, it is important not only to see this case as an example of the struggle for religious equality, but also to understand that this is a wider process that affects the very foundation of British identity. For many years, Easter was not only an important religious event, but also a moment when children, regardless of their parents' religion, could feel a sense of community. No matter how much the demographics of the country change, no matter how diverse its cultural strata become, the fact remains that Christianity has been the foundation upon which Britain's moral and cultural guidelines have been built. Refusing to celebrate Easter in schools can be perceived as a rejection of the very essence of what made the country great. But what exactly is behind this refusal? What are the goals of those who decide to abolish religious holidays in schools? The answer to this question is multifaceted. On the one hand, the arguments in favor of inclusivity and respect for cultural diversity sound reasonable and timely. Indeed, the UK is home to many ethnic and religious groups, and on the face of it, not celebrating Easter may seem like a step towards harmony. On the other hand, however, it is important to ask ourselves, are we forgetting that inclusivity should mean respect for all, not just minorities? Why should the traditions of the majority retreat before the demands of political correctness? And after all, is this approach not just another step towards the loss of national identity? Nevertheless, we cannot ignore the fact that UK society is changing. There are more and more people in the country who do not identify with Christian values. Statistics show a rise in the number of atheists and agnostics, and a significant increase in the number of people practicing other religions. It is therefore natural that schools may have debates about which holiday and which traditions should be central to the educational process. The abolition of Easter may be seen as an attempt to accommodate the interests of those who do not practice Christianity, do not want to participate in religious ceremonies, or do not consider these holidays to be part of their culture. However, it is important to realize that such decisions must be made with respect for all parties, not just political expediency. The abandonment of Easter in schools is not without consequences. First, it is a blow to those who value Christian traditions and who still believe that Christianity is an important element of the country's cultural foundation. Second, it sets a precedent that could spread to other traditions and holidays. If Easter, one of the most significant Christian holidays, can be eliminated in favor of inclusivity, what does the future hold for us? Is it possible that other traditions, such as Christmas or even Thanksgiving, will also be questioned as part of the quest for harmony and tolerance? The questions remain open, of course, but it is clear that taking such decisions is a step towards the gradual erasure of cultural differences and traditions that cannot always be replaced by something of equal value. The fact that this issue has been the subject of much debate in the UK highlights not only the problem of religious identity, but also the larger question of what constitutes a nation and who has the right to determine which traditions should be preserved and which should be forgotten. Obviously, such changes in the school system are of concern to those who perceive traditions as an integral part of their national heritage. Traditions, including religious holidays, provide an opportunity for a society to unite, whether or not all of that society's beliefs are shared. Easter was such a unifying element, and its abolition is seen by many as a step towards losing this sense of unity. On the other hand, it cannot be overlooked that the UK is changing, and the world we live in is becoming increasingly multicultural. The question arises, how can we find a balance between preserving tradition and respecting the diversity that now forms the basis of modern society? Perhaps the solution lies in preserving important traditions, but at the same time opening up to new perspectives and integrating different cultural and religious elements into public life. However, this process must be deliberate in order not to lose what is at the core of the nation, and not to allow inclusiveness to become a process of wiping away the history and traditions that are the foundation of our society.